This is an oral history with Stan Skinger. Am I
Skinger.
Skinger.
Yes.
Thank
That's
you.
okay.
Thank you. And this is an oral history for the Carnegie Library Oral History Project and the Rocky Flats Cold War Museum. And I'm interviewing Stan in his home in Lakewood, I believe.
Yes, ma'am.
And my name is Dorothy Charlo. And today's date is March 9th?
Yes.
March 9th, 2005. Great. So, Stan, can you tell me, as I mentioned to you, we like to ask the first question is, when and where were you born?
I was born on December 11th, 42 in Chicago, Illinois.
And can you tell me something about what your family was like and your...
Well, it was a mixed family in terms of we were probably for the first 6 or 7 years of my life, we may be in an apartment at one point, and then we would move in with the grandparents and then to another apartment. My father was in college at Loyola studying for a CPA, and you know, he actually had to work at meat packing and other things to pay for it. So it was putting and growing a young family and just trying to stay around, keep things going. I was about 7, and he had gotten out of college and gotten a job with, I believe it was Arthur Anderson. He worked for the IRS a little bit too, but was gaining experience, and then he decided to open his own business and moved to way down in the south side from Chicago down to a place called Flossmoor, Illinois. And they built a house out there and moved out to the country. The closest house we had was about a mile away, and I loved it. And that's where I grew up. My father and mother split up probably, I was 9 or 10 years old, which left us as a family sitting out on the farm. Mom at that point, although she had her degree, was not employed. And she worked selling pies to the restaurant in town. And frankly, I learned how to live off the land. There were some other poor folks in farmhouses nearby, and I learned about catching turtles and catching pheasants and doing other things to just get food, and we had a large garden. And we lived there till I was probably 12 or 13 years old, and then moved to a place called Homewood, Illinois, about 5 miles away, which was a small town of a couple thousand people, and we had a house there. It was a smaller house. I mean, it was still big enough. I think we had 1, 2, 3, 4 bedrooms, so it was, you know, it was in a very nice area.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
Yes, I have 2 brothers and 1 sister. And, you know, I'll be frank, I didn't like my mother. She was not a good mother. My father remarried. My stepmother ultimately became my mother, and that's just the way it was. It's a weird family thing, but the way things work out. But I bounced around a lot of different grade schools, elementary schools, high schools over the years, ultimately ending up graduating from Rich Township High School in Park Forest, Illinois. And by that time, I'd moved back out with my dad into the country again at another place he had built. And I actually left home first. I was about 17 years old. And I just didn't want to live under the direction of others. I had quit high school once and then gone back. I found out that it's not quite as easy to get by without an education as you might think. So went back in. During the time that I was growing up, I had various jobs. I worked at a nursery. I was a newspaper carrier for a couple of years. Let's see, I took a job during high school years as a plumber on weekends, a plumber's assistant, and ultimately became a plumber. I enjoyed tinkering with cars and ultimately became an auto mechanic. And then when I decided to go back to school and start college, I took a job with E.J. Corvette and Company in a toy store that they had in their department store, the toy department. And frankly, Barbie dolls and stuff like that were not my interest. And I gravitated over to the tire center at E.J. Corvette just changing tires to start with. But by the time I decided that a change needed to take place through an unusual situation, I was manager of that store and opening, working with 5 others. We were opening a new store up in another area. In, oh gosh, I think it was July of '63, a friend of mine from back home had moved to Colorado, worked at Rocky Flats, and was getting married to a girl back from Illinois that we both knew real well. So I came out here for the wedding. I fell in love with Colorado. I applied at Rocky Flats. I didn't care what the job would be. I went home and I packed. And I moved out here in November in '63, and I've been here ever since. And I love it.
So you were about 20 then? 19?
I was 20. I was just prior to my 21st birthday. Yeah. And my first job was as a janitor at Rocky Flats in the 44 building, where we worked mainly with beryllium. There was some uranium being processed and utilized in there, but it was mainly beryllium.
Can you describe a little bit what was done in the 44 building?
The 44 building, there was some foundry work done in it, not a whole lot, where they would found or melt down and cast shapes in uranium, and then there was machining done in that uranium through the building to shape it into certain shapes. Generally half semicircles, half, what do you call it, like bowls. Okay, and then beryllium was done in a separate corner of the area, and they would bring beryllium in large blocks, casts of, they were probably 12 inches around and 3 foot long. And beryllium is an extremely light metal. You can pick up one of those ingots in your hands. I mean, it's very light, much lighter than aluminum. But that was done in a special room because they knew that the beryllium was light and could create problems. But protection in there was, sometimes somebody might wear a mask, and that would be it. But at any rate, I cleaned the beryllium room. I would have to go through and sweep that up nightly, vacuum it up, whatever we did, mop.
As a janitor?
As a janitor. And then any other areas in the buildings I'd be reassigned. But the beryllium room was my mainstay and one office area.
Now, you'd had to go through the process of getting clearance?
Yes, I had the clearance. When I was out here, it was in July. I didn't get cleared until late October.
But you started working there?
I started working there after. Well, I started after I had clearance, yes. Once I was cleared and notified, that's when I moved out. I had everything ready to go by that time.
And did you know anything about Rocky Flats, what they did? Or
yeah, I knew that they made the important parts for nuclear weapons. I knew they were heavily involved in the nuclear arms field. That was, there was a secrecy about what they did, but there was an openness about what the product was. And it wasn't until I was in the building and working the various buildings as a guard that I found out we pretty much do the whole thing here. There's pieces added on afterwards, but this is the core.
And what led you to take the job at Rocky Flats? Was it a good job, good salary?
Well, my friend Dean, had been working there for about 1.5 years, and he said, they're good people, it pays well, they don't beat on you, they're not hard workers, and it can be fun. And it was fun. If it hadn't have been fun, I would have done something else. I mean, I worked at, just as a part-time job for some fun, I worked at a restaurant called Sam's in Boulder. I waited tables. Well, it was a nice way to meet people, girls especially. Bennett's Pizza was a big thing in Boulder right then, up on the hill. And they needed a funny car type thing built. So I did some work for them mechanically in my backyard at the place and built them a funny car. These were things I enjoyed doing. And if Rocky Flats had not been something I would have enjoyed, I would have left. It was all about, do I like my job? And am I working with people I enjoy? And it was, and I got paid for it, and the payback at that time was very good. I essentially, from the manager, and it was going to a regional manager position, the move out here to being a janitor brought my pay up by about, 60% to be a janitor. So You're going to pay me for something I enjoy? Great. You know, that's fine. So I enjoyed regular paychecks of what would be an extremely long work week back east as a plumber. So the pay was good. That's an enhancement. I got to buy my toys and, you know, do what I wanted to do.
And did you live there in Boulder?
Originally, I lived at the 4-H motel in Boulder for about a month, and then we moved to an apartment. It was across from the campus. And then I moved to the Skyland Motel, and I lived in the Skyland Motel with 3 other roommates for, maybe 6 months. I'm trying to recall the exact series of events. Then I moved to, with another, one of the roommates, we moved to a place right by the near baseline of Broadway. It was 1 block off that corner. And we rented a house there for some ridiculous sum per month, $65 or $75 a month. And then one day I was driving through El Dorado Springs and found a cabin for rent there at $55 a month. And I liked to rock climb. I was getting into it. I liked the mountains. It was right there, so that's where I moved. And I lived in El Dorado Springs until about the time I got married. And then I rented a place in Denver. So I lived fairly close in that area the whole time.
So you were doing the janitorial work at Rocky Flats. Did you
Right.
remain doing that, or?
Well, I did that. You know, it wasn't ever my ideal goal of fun. I enjoyed the old guys, the old coal miners I worked with. I enjoyed the young kids that came in all cocky about how they're going to be the president of the Dow Chemical in the future. I mean, I enjoyed the people I was around, and it was funny working with them. But it wasn't something that allowed me to do anything further. So I kept watching the job postings. I'd always had an interest in law enforcement, and when the guard position came up, the plant protection position, I thought, yeah, okay. It was a temporary position. I think they wanted somebody for 6 months. It looked like it'd be an inroad to gain some experience, so that's what I did. And I applied for plant protection. And then I ended up staying there through my entire career.
And you stayed for until?
Well, I went into plant protection in June of '64, and I stayed in plant protection until '71 when I left the site. During that time, I had a 2-year stint out when I was drafted for Vietnam. And I would not have had the draft affect me because of the position I had at Rocky Flats, but every year we had to send in a draft deferment to our draft board back in Illinois. I didn't bother. I went to Vietnam. That's simple. So,
And that was what years then?
that was 66 through 68.
And were you in? What did you do in Vietnam?
Well, the first year of my Army service, I was married at the time. I had just gotten married. I had figured I'm going to end up in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, like everybody else. So I moved back to Illinois with my parents and my wife, and because Fort Campbell was close and we'd be able to visit. And I got to Fort Campbell, and 1 week later they sent me to Fort Carson, Colorado. They decided that I was either going to be work artillery, or I was going to be a medic, or I was going to be a cook. Cooking, as much as I enjoy it, and the Army conditions didn't appeal, the medic piece would avoid my being able to carry a weapon and be part of combat in a combat situation. As much as I love medical field, it wasn't okay. So I said, okay, artillery's fine. And I went down to Fort Carson, studied artillery, and I went over to Vietnam as a corporal. I did attain the rank of corporal while I was still at Fort Carson, which made me an assistant gunner in our artillery piece. When I got to Vietnam, I was assigned to a gun, an artillery piece, as part of a battery. And we moved around within Vietnam itself. I was in artillery until, well, actually I was in artillery the entire tour, but I came home in, I think it was April of '68. A bunch of things had happened both at home with deaths in the family, and I had been injured. So I got a leave home. And when we came into, this is bad, but I'll put it on tape anyhow, we were supposed to land at Travis Air Force Base, but it was fog. So we ended up at landing, I think it was LAX, wherever it was a diversion, and I went AWOL. I mean, what are you going to do? I got to be honest. I've been in combat. What are you going to do, kill me? I don't care.
Yeah.
I really don't care. I wanted to be with my family.
Yeah.
So I stole a set of crutches, and I got a ticket, and I went back to Chicago, only to find out that my wife had moved 3 days earlier back to Colorado. So I spent a couple of days with my mom and dad, and then I came to Colorado and went over to her mom's house and found her, and we spent the next few weeks together until I was caught. And at that point, I was given several options, the main one being going back to Vietnam. So I said, well, I don't like jail, and Vietnam sounds good again. So back to Vietnam. Well, an offer came up right then. They needed advisors for Special Forces to train Montagnards in artillery pieces because they were dropping them in on the border area as part of the A-Team protection. And I ended up being flown into a place called Tuiata, which is a little town up in the general tri-border area of Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. And I was with an A-Team, which was composed of, I think, 11 or 12 Special Forces folks and myself and one other. And I learned a little bit of Montagnard. I learned the numbering system, and I started teaching them fire direction control, you know, with the slide rules and the maps and everything else. And they took on real well to the maps. They didn't take on to my pronunciation of numbers. And it was a struggle. It was fun. But I ended up doing a lot of patrols and some illicit things during that period of time, as never took place, but always did in terms of traveling.
Yeah.
And then right prior to my coming home, I was shipped back to my old unit. My time with Special Forces had ended. I spent about a month with my old unit and then came home. One of the things that they did with the Special Forces thing is when I was at ready to go, they shipped me into An-Khe, which is a center town, even though Special Forces was based out of Pleiku, in An-Khe, and they gave me a crash course in medicine, in being a medic, and a crash course in a couple of other things that were theoretically required out in the jungle area. One of the things in terms of the medical training was they wanted me to be able to work with the Montagnards and treat some of their medical stuff, which was one of the delights of my life because I got to deliver babies.
Oh.
And it was wonderful. So, but Vietnam's a beautiful country. Mm-hmm. I love the country. I really enjoyed the Montagnards. I frankly, the South Vietnamese army was worthless. We were attacked on one position, and you could always hear the South Vietnamese army because they would circle your camp as protectors. And it was one night about midnight, I was out. I don't remember why I wasn't sleeping, but I was out, and all of a sudden I realized there's no noise. And they had picked up and left, and about 30 seconds later the attack came and the barrage started coming in. And the South Vietnamese were an incredible people, or the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong, and they would take our old sea ration cans and the central explosive pieces that we had to take out of the artillery pieces to get the fuses in, and they would remold them and make grenades out of them. And their improvisation of whatever they had at hand to fight back was amazing, absolutely amazing. I have a great respect for those people, even though I had to fight and kill them. I do. But anyhow, came back. I spent 2 or 3 weeks deciding whether I wanted to go back to Rocky Flats or do something else. One of the problems I had was I was going to carry a gun. And frankly, I didn't know if I could trust myself with one. I had been trained to utilize it at a reactive moment, at a point of aggression, and I was very afraid that I would not be able to discern that line as to when to use it. It wasn't like we got threatened often or anything like that. It was just, I'm not clear what my line is.
Because
so I was
of the
hesitant.
experiences you had had.
Right.
Yeah.
And I thought through it, decided to go back, give it a try, and that's when I started doing a lot of pistol work. I had already become a police firearms instructor through NRA and done some training for Rocky Flats because we had to do regular training with firearms. And I decided to get more into that as a sideline from my job. And that's when Bill and I went on the pistol team together and did a bunch of other stuff. And we traveled throughout the state and took many state and regional championships.
Just for people who would be listening to this is Bill Dennison.
Yes, Bill Dennison.
And so he was your co-worker in
He was co-worker,
firearms.
but Bill and I were also well on the way before I went to Vietnam to being buddies. And the reasoning on that was where I lived in Denver and the route that I had to take to come to work and the way other people did, it became convenient to build a carpool of people to go up there. And it was a way of just having some association. We all worked the same shift, and there was Bill and Al and Joe Easler and myself that carpooled.
Al was...
I can't think of Al's last name. He ultimately became a fireman at Rocky Flats, but he lived down on, I think it was 460 Estes, but it was due south of here. And he was the reason that I ever saw this house for sale. He was looking for a new house, and we were carpooling one day and decided to drive by it. And he looked at the house. He had 3 kids already. He looked at the house and said, "Nope, too small." And I'm going, "That's mine." I mean, it was an instant decision. My wife and I had been looking for a home for quite a while at that point. It was like, this is what I want. My wife might not like it, but this is what I want. And I think that was November of '69, and October, somewhere in there. It was after the fire. And I bought it, paid for it in February, and I've lived here ever since. So anyhow, yeah, Joe Easler was another guard. He lived down at 38th and Kipling.
Now, his last name is
Easler, E-A-S-L-E-R. And Joe is a very heavy man, very Italian, very set in his ways, lived with his parents, and he's one of those people that had he been there, he wouldn't have gone in the fire. And it's not a put down on Joe, that was just Joe. There's things Joe didn't do. And you got used to Joe being that way, and that's how you went. But at any rate, that's sort of the circuitous route.
Right. So you and Bill Dennison did firearms training together.
Did firearms training and we were on the pistol team together.
Now
We got together as friends, Eva and there's Elva, his wife, and I, and my wife all associated together.
Now, was Bill in the fire, was he a fireman at that point?
No, Bill, in fact, I never knew that Bill became a fireman out there. I knew that Bill had moved up in rank after I had left, and that he was in charge of several things out there in terms of resecuring the plant during the events that followed in the early 70s. I mean, they got the half tracks in, and Bill was involved in some of that. And I remember at one point he mentioned that they actually had a mortar available, which was, how are you going to use a mortar? I mean, but anyway, you know, I know Bill got heavily involved in that, but I didn't know that he had become a fireman.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. But now, at this point, you and Bill were in the security forces.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Yes.
as part of the security forces, what did you do at that point?
Well, most of the guards were assigned to buildings and would do interior patrols on the buildings. I never actually was assigned for any extended period of time. I might be for 3 months or something like that. It just drove me nuts. Walking the same path several times a night, turning the same clock, seeing the same things. It just wasn't fun. And I made it known pretty well to my captain, Archuleta. And I just didn't want to do that. I'd just as soon be doing a patrol or filling in one building one night, filling in another, and just, you know, moving around just to keep some diversion going. Otherwise, I was going to get bored and sleeping.
Yeah, yeah. So you wanted more activity.
Right. I wanted something different. I just didn't want a route, you know, this is what I'm going to do at this time. I mean, some of the guys, God bless them, that was their home. They had little drawers put away with their carving tools in them, and they would sit all night in between walks, and they would carve wooden chains or do engraving or, you know, whatever their interest was. It was a nice job. And they knew what they had to do to have their free time, and that's what they wanted. But it's not what I wanted. So I would switch shifts as often as I needed to. If I needed to work midnights for a while, that was fine. If I needed to work jump shift, that was fine. It didn't matter to me. Day shift was not a shift I wanted to work because you had to sit there and be the bad guy of making people take out the badges they didn't want to wear and show them to you to get in and put them back in. And just pretty much just tick people off. And it just wasn't I like to interact with people, but I like being an interaction and not a police effect on them all the time. Being a guard, and you can't do that. So I just avoided that where I could.
So now, how did you get involved in the firefighting for the 69 fire? You want to kind of...
It wasn't a vote.
how-
It wasn't a vote. We were carpooling in that day, and I
That day meaning the
mailed
day?
the fire day of '69. I think it was, what, May 19th?
It was a Sunday, as I...
It was a Sunday.
Yeah, and you were going to work on
Yeah,
Sunday.
actually, it was Sunday or Monday. At any rate, it was a short shift day. It was a holiday type day where you had absolute minimum staffing at the plant. There were the guards, there were the firemen, and there were the boiler people. And workers weren't in there. So it was pretty much an empty day, maintenance day. And Bill and I were coming in through the gate. And as we came in through the east gate, we were told there's a fire. I think they said 79, but it could have been because it was 79 complex. And they're saying it's a bad one. Okay, and I honestly don't remember if we went to 21, which is where the guard center was, or we went directly to the fire site. I really don't know. I lost all my clothing in the fire, all of my personal clothing. So I assume at this point that we just went down there, or we stopped at 21 and were turned right around. But we ended up down at the building. We were told that the firemen that had originally gone in at the fire start, and I'm not even sure our shift had started yet, we were early, had been contaminated and there was nobody else to go back in. And it's like, Bill and I looked at each other and let's go. We've got no training other than fire extinguisher or anything else. I mean, we know some rules. You don't use water. Okay, you never use water. There are buckets of sand on every pillar, little magnesium oxide that you throw on the fire to put it out, to smother it. And you wear a respirator because you're going to get contamination inside. And that's it. Well, we went in the building, and it's a situation. We went in from the west side. There's a loading dock with doors on each side. Then there's an interior sort of hallway, a perimeter around the machining area, the dry box area. And then you go through another set of double doors, and you're in the main area itself. And I don't know if anybody has ever looked at the size of the area of the fire, what it involved, but it's huge. It's like going into a Kmart or going into a building like that. We're talking a big room, and we're talking lots of aisles, and we're talking lots of underpasses and having to walk around. I mean, it's a maze. It's a building I'm very familiar with. I've walked it hundreds of times, both upstairs, downstairs. I've got a general familiarity with the layout of, I've got my first floor, I've got my offices, I've got my hallways, I've got my plenums on the roof, which composes second story. And I remember thinking at the time that the plenums, if they go, were in real trouble, based on the fact of the 57 fire and all the rumors and history. Nobody ever gave us the information about that. Nobody ever told us what happened. It was all hand-me-down information, whether it was all true or all false. There's no way of knowing, but you just knew you didn't want your plenums to burn.
Yeah. Could you describe for people who wouldn't know what plenums are?
Plenums are like an air filter on a car. You've got to clean your air before you pull it into the engine, except in this case, you've got to clean the air from the building before you blow it out into the atmosphere. So the flow is reversed from inside to outside. And if you've got fire inside and the filters are flammable and they burn, all the stuff that's been trapped in there is going to go up in the smoke, and all the combustion material inside is going to go out into the atmosphere. So, I mean, these are critical filters
And
to
the
keep.
plenums are on the
They're on the roof.
the roof.
They're on an upper level because all the ventilation sucks up. Because you want to pick up what's in the air and let the rest fall out. I guess that's the theory that they had, but or it's the most convenient place to put them. I don't know. But anyhow, that's where they were. So we were both cognizant plenums were there, and that we couldn't let the fire get into the plenums, and that if it did go there, there's nothing you could do. The second floor on that building was composed mainly of office. There was a second floor usable as well as the plenums, but it was composed mainly of office areas and boiler room. There was really no production stuff up there. There was paper, there was an enclosed top secret room with roll down windows that you secured every night, and I could not even get access into that room. One of the jobs I had, I'm going to take an aside, one of the jobs we had, I can't think of his, Billy Terrell was one of the other guards that I worked with early on, was going around and collecting from all the buildings, all the classified paper that had been destroyed and thrown away that day, and taking it to an incinerator behind Building 21 and burning it to make sure that all classified information was destroyed. That is one building, one room in the whole facility that we could not go into. We had to make a daylight pickup of that material under armed guard and carry that down and store it until we did the burning that night, and then we would burn that. So that was a critically secure room, and that's one you always checked. And that's why I remember the upstairs.
And this was the 77 complex, is
Yes.
that right? Yeah.
Well, as I talk, I'm going to refer to 79 a lot,
Okay.
and that is because the buildings were added to in pieces, and it became known as the complex. Okay? What the vernacular, there was a 76, 77, there were the guard posts and the rest. While this was not really a separate area, we just referred to it all as that. And it just has become an acronym. I'm actually referring back to the 76, 77 fire area. At any rate, Billy and I went in, and we went through the double doors, and it was like, I can't remember the expletives used, but they were certainly used. You couldn't see anything. There was no major lighting, there was emergency lighting, and there was orange glow, and there was smoke. And your visibility was 4 or 5 feet in shadow, other than shadowy visibility at that point. And it was big. We could tell it was big, because if we can see an orange glow through this, something's burning. So we started looking for buckets of sand, and we found a couple. And, you know, we tried to find a place where it was burning, and then we're out of sand. What now? Well, there's nobody to ask. There's nobody down there that you can go out to. You're inside a building. You're in a survivor. We carried our air in, and we had masks. And it was like, okay, where's water? You know, we're going to use water. I don't care what the rules are. There's no option. There's nobody to ask. Even if there is, I'm probably not going to pay attention to them. So Billy and I went for the water, and we found a fire hose, and I honestly don't remember where we found it. We ended up using a couple or three during the whole battle. And we started going in, and when it got hot, Bill would spray me with water, and I would advance, and he would keep me cool, and we'd go in and we'd put out a pathway. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to work our way, and we worked together. We didn't have to talk a lot, but we worked together really well, intuitively almost. And
Now, this is Bill Dennison.
Bill Dennison,
Right.
yeah. He's the only person I'll refer
Right.
to as Bill. I probably.
Okay.
I'll tell you if I don't. But anyhow, as we went in, we got the water and we started firing. We were trying to get into the center of the building. We wanted to get underneath the center beams and underneath the center area to find out what was involved. Are we at risk here for the plenum? Do we have other things going on? When it came time that we had fires in dry boxes, in the, I forget, the glove boxes type things, the areas that were always to be kept dry, we used water to put them out. We were aware that there's plutonium there, we were aware it's containers, and that if we ended up accidentally blowing the pieces together, that we would have a criticality. There's no other option.
There was no choice.
There's no choice.
And you were thinking there was no choice because you were trying to protect the plenums.
Well, that was a back thought. We were trying to put out the fire.
Okay.
But that was a back thought. We've got to make sure that this building stays intact as we do it. And we don't know we can't see the full extent of the fire. We just know it's huge. And one of the things we determined very on is there's what they call Benelex. It's a shielding to keep the radiation from going on. And it's fundamentally like 4-inch thick masonite. It's very thick. Now, if you've ever tried to see masonite burn, it doesn't catch fire. Okay, this stuff was burning. Okay, we've got a fire. You know, why this is burning, whether it's radiant heat that ignited it, we don't feel it now. We don't know, we don't care. It's burning. And when you've got something like that, we know we've got a fire that's been going for a little bit. This didn't just suddenly occur unless there was an incredibly intense amount of heat in there. And that thought didn't occur to us at that point, but in looking back, there could have been. There could have been an excursion. You know, there wasn't, obviously, but there could have been. But it wasn't a logical firefighting thought process. It was two guys going in who had, you know, worked prairie fires and things like that in the past just because of being in the country. But we're not out there with burlap sacks and beating off grass. We're doing what we can. We didn't know how to use fire hoses. Didn't know how to turn them on. So, I mean, it was, you learned as you went.
Yeah.
At any rate, we went ahead and we went in and we did a lot of trips in and out. And at one time, the health physics monitors said, you guys can't go back in it. Well, who's going to go in it? We don't have anyone else. Well, then, fine, we're going back in. We're not going to let you. You don't have a choice. Became a very vicious battle until finally I said, you got two choices. Either you give me the equipment or I'm going to take it from you. Okay, and it was a very clear message that I'm done. I've made my decision. This is where we're going to go. And Bill and I were both at that point. We're not going to let this fire catch back up on us again. It's just not going to happen. So we continued to go in and out until finally we were actually relieved by somebody. By that time, the fire was pretty well under control. There was still smoldering stuff, but we didn't have flames anymore.
I'm curious why there weren't other firemen around to relieve you.
The Rocky Flats Fire Department was a group of maybe 20 or 25 people who worked shifts of 24 to 48 hours. I don't remember how their shifts worked out. And then rotated in with people off. And like any fire department, which I'm not criticizing, people need time off. Other jobs on their time off. They're painters, they build decks. I mean, they have second jobs outside of here. Now, at any one point, you could not expect more than a third. And the administrators worked Monday through Friday, okay? Not complaining. That's how this system's set up. So fundamentally, you've got your 24 or 25 guys split up into small groups. We're there on a slow day. There's not a lot going on, so there's not a full complement, and the other people are home. Okay, and we were lucky in terms of one shift is getting off on guards, one shift is coming on. We had double complement of minimal staffing at one time, at the time of this fire. And otherwise, I'm not sure how we would have done it because there weren't enough guards to pull off posts to supplement. There might have been 2 extra people that could have left their building beyond the firemen that were present. So you're not starting with many people. And while the addition of, I think we're shifted at 17 or 18 new guards coming in, sounds like you've doubled your staff. That's not very many people on a facility that size and a fire that involvement. So for them to call in people takes a while.
Yeah.
First, you have to have somebody there capable and with authorization to say, we need to call people in. I'm not sure that was there at the time. It was a weekend. Then you have to get a hold of the people. Where are their phone numbers? Who's got them? Are they contaminated? Are they stuck somewhere? Is there somebody that can get to them? I'm theorizing on why.
Right, yeah.
But there just wasn't anybody there.
And you were there fairly early after the fire was discovered, is that right? Or
We came on the site somewhere in the 2:30 to 2:45 range, as I recollect right now. I'm thinking we were running a 3 to 11 shift that day. The fire had just been discovered and the people had just gone in as we came through the gates. By the time we got down there, they were out, and they'd gone in just with respirators to start with, or with minimal, and their gear, and they were hot. I mean, they didn't put anything on before they went in. Bill and I had coveralls, and we did duct tape and put on rubber gloves, so we had some minimal
So you had
protection.
coveralls. Did you have your own clothes on underneath?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah, I lost everything I wore, and they even tried to take my wedding ring, but I wouldn't let them do that. They finally got it cleaned up. We were coated. We were coated. At any rate, probably the most scary time was we were going in. I don't know how many times we'd been underneath this one area, but they had a false ceiling hanging. The old fiber stuff in squares about 3 feet long and 2 feet wide, and the aluminum channel that you just set in place. And we had soaked that thing every time we'd gone through. And as I was going through at one time, Bill was soaking it, and the whole thing collapsed on me. In my mind, it's like, second floor. And it scared the living daylights out of me. And then I realized that all this gunk laying on me was just the ceiling tiles. And I was like, oh, man. So we had to fight through that mess of stuff. It had just gotten too heavy from the water. But that was probably the scariest moment in there, outside of the time that we had gone out one time. And I don't remember, we used to just sort of drop the hose and then fight our way back to it and then carry it on and drop the hose. You know, if there was a hot area, Bill would still mist me out. Sometimes I'd missed him. I don't mean to say that I always took the lead. But at any rate, this one had gotten charred on one side. And when I got back in, I turned it on, and I put it on full stream. You know, just like you'd have a garden hose going out, and it's too much pressure because it starts blowing stuff around. And you need to wet stuff down, not blow it around. So I went to shut it off, and rather than just slowing it down, I shut it all the way off. And from full pressure to no pressure, you know, the backup burst the side of the hose. And that caught my mask, and that's when I lost my mask. It had gotten blown off by the water pressure from that. And then the hose is flailing around, and you've got this wild snake. You know, so and
did you feel panic or fear when your mask went off?
to a certain extent, but it wasn't a panic or fear like I'm going to run. It's like, I got to get this thing on. And of course, it's got straps, and it's caught up. Everything's out of place. So I had to get it back in place. And 30 seconds, a minute, 30 seconds, I don't know. But in the meantime, I'm breathing hard, and I'm breathing the fumes, and I know this is not good. You know, this is very not good. Because the smells and the tastes, it wasn't smoke, just smoke. There was all sorts of crud in there. I could just feel it. But
Now, just so other people that might not know what was there, you know, what was in the air? Was it
we had
combination of
perchloroethylene, trichloroethylene, toluene, plastics, vinyl rubber, paints, probably plutonium where it had been burning. God knows. God knows. They had more chemicals for cleaning and flushing and washing. And
So it would have been mainly chemicals that you would need the mask for, not just plutonium then?
Oh, it wasn't, no, no,
It wasn't
it wasn't plutonium. The mask was to be able to have an external source of air,
Okay.
because the air inside was not breathable. First, I don't have any idea what the oxygen level was, but if you've got a fire burning that's heavy and it's not flaring, it's got a lack of oxygen keeping it down. You know, if you've got a fuel source, it's going to burn as well as it can with available oxygen. This didn't go through my mind at the time. This is going
But
back.
that's why you had the oxygen
You could
mask
not breathe
on.
without carrying the survivor. And the survivor tanks were like diving tanks. It was almost like dive gear, except it had a full face mask on it. And it had a respirator filter where it would allow the air out. Actually, I think we did wear a respirator filter where it would allow filtered air in and then you could exhale. Because I think we did run low on survivor tanks at one point. They didn't have enough tanks at the plant site. And they had to call all the surrounding communities, Boulder and Broomfield and the rest, to have them rush their gear out so that we could just continue with the fight. Geez, I don't know where to go. I do know that there was one spot that Bill and I kept going back to, and I believe it was a hydraulic press that they used to shape metals. But it was something oily, and that damn thing, we could not get that out. And it was a tall machine, okay, and it led up to the main beam that went down through the building. And our biggest concern was we couldn't see, but with the red glow, it's like if that thing is red and metal fatigues with heat, we can have the second floor on us. So we were real careful to get back to what that area was. And during the times we were changing out our air, we would talk about any strategy, because talking through the masks was just, you know, it was like two of you speaking into a can 5 feet away. It just wasn't good communication. You had to yell to do it. Let me think.
I think that Bill talked about being, how scary it was to walk through what he called the sheep dips when there was so much water in them.
Oh, God, that was a major, major concern. To get underneath a dry box, which stands about 3 feet off the floor, and then you reach into it and work on it, to get underneath them, because these things extend the whole length of the building. They've got these steps going down, like a little drop, like you'd have going down your basement stairs from an outside, and then back up the other side. Well, those plugged up immediately, and with the water we were using, they filled. So to go through them, you were wading through this stuff, and the concern later was we had blown some pieces of plutonium in there, and because it was in water, it was keeping it from going critical. And one of the biggest concerns they had after the fire was draining those, because if you remove the water, your plutonium goes critical. So they had to set up special floats that would drop this centimeters at a time, and they would measure radiation. But Bill and I just had to go through them. And it was like, literally, it was his thing of a sheep dip was an excellent example. We used to kid around about that, because you never knew what slime is in here. What has gotten into this mess? It could just be dirty water, and Lord knows what else. But there was that. There was the plutonium was carried. The little pits were carried in cages. I think they were roughly 14 or by 16 or whatever. They were squares of welded metal, and then they went down to a little area that you would put a pit in. And these were designed to keep the pieces at a critical spacing, so they could never get closer than so far together. And
Because if you have them too close, then
you've got a nuclear reaction. You've got a critical excursion. There's a lot of different ways you can do it, but that can be anything from a lethal dose on up to, you know, a total fusion meltdown, where you then do have some a minor amount of actual fission taking place, where you've got a release of power. Mostly it's just going to be heat right there. But at any rate, you're dead.
and that's why they had them spaced.
Spaced. Right, you don't put them together. You bring them together, the more closer and closer, the more critical they get, and then ultimately you get your explosion itself. And there were two halves that were put together in the end. Okay, they were still subcritical, so 2 wouldn't do that. They were hot. But then there was a core in the center that would then be filled, I believe it was tritium gas, and that would be your igniter. And then outside of that, you had shielding of beryllium, which accelerated the neutron stuff. Then you had boron to contain it, and then you had radium to add, or not radium, excuse me, uranium to add to it. There were layers in an atomic weapon of various metals. Then those were surrounded by explosive devices that were timed to all go at the same time, so that you would then compress the power for the millisecond that it would take for it to go completely into critical. And that would give you your nuclear explosion.
Yeah. And you're describing what?
I'm describing just the
typical-
very center plutonium piece of that,
Okay.
which was the major thing that we did out there.
Yeah.
We also did the beryllium part of it, and I believe I don't know where the boron took place. I honestly, I didn't pay attention because I didn't know as much about nuclear weapons at that time. But at any rate,
But the pit, the
the
plutonium
pit,
pit
the
is what?
pure plutonium itself was what we were dealing with. And while plutonium can burn, self-ignite, just like some other metals can, sodium and so on, to the air, the real effect is in a large form, it just oxidizes like crazy. You know, it forms like rust on the surface and just, it goes there. If you've got fine filings, then they can do it fast enough because of surface area to ignite. But we weren't worried about it igniting, you know, consciously. We'd worked with it enough that we just weren't worried about that. We were worried about getting the pieces together. But when you've got an area where there's a bunch of the pieces that's burning, water. And if it blows them together, it blows them together. You can't control that. So we're a little scared about that the whole time, but again, you didn't get votes. You had to do what you had to do right then.
Now, I had read that the chief, the fire chief, Jesser, I believe was his name.
Yeah, Wayne Jesser.
He was the one that had made the decision to use water. It sounds like you kind of did what you needed to do. Is that?
That's interesting. All due respect to Wayne Jesser, okay? I know he was there. Never saw him in the fire area. He was out. He was gone. They may have gone in and made the decision to do water. It was never passed on. Okay.
So in a sense, he may have made the same decision that you made. in a
I
sense.
suspect, honestly, that the other crew that went in from the north side made the same decision based on the same information. I mean, I don't care what the rocket science is. There's sometimes you pick up a stone and throw it. Okay? You've got to go with what you got.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Wayne may have made that decision. He may have authorized it, many other things, but we just did it.
But basically, you did what you felt you had to do at the moment in the situation you were in.
We had no direction. We had a bunch of do-nots. We did not have any do's. We were not told to go in. I can't remember if there was a request or not, to be honest. Bill and I sort of decided, and while Bill's a very laid-back, congenial, easygoing guy, when Bill's got to make a quick decision, it's made. He doesn't sit there and ponder for a half hour. He's very instrumental in that area. I mean, if Bill's got to do something, it's going to get done now. And he will not cause harm. He would never intentionally do anything wrong, but he makes decisions, and so do I.
So would you say that in that sense you and he were alike in this situation? That you did?
We were a team. We were one person at all time. He saved my butt. I saved his. You can't imagine. I've experienced it a couple other times in my life. In Vietnam, and a couple other times working in my job that I've just left. And there are times when two people meld and become one to accomplish the task. And when that happens, it's a beautiful thing. And you don't question it. You don't challenge it. You appreciate it. And this was one of those times. I loved it. Bill and I stayed very good friends after the fire. And I spent some time with his kids as they grew up. And I'm sorry we grew apart, but we did. I had a different career path, and it just wasn't convenient anymore. But Bill and I also were a team during the patrol after the fire, which went on for several months, where we would go into the building, the same fire area, and it started right after the fire. And we would patrol watching for hot spots, spontaneous ignition, because they were a very high risk. The chemicals used in there, even though totally inert on their own, non-flammable or non-combustible when mixed, could self-ignite or could self-explode. We'd known that from back when Joe Campbell had the explosion using non-combustible cleaning solvents, and all of a sudden got the right mixture in, that he had the explosion. That really contaminated the building, and that happened, I think, my first week as a guard.
Oh. And that was in which building?
That was
In the same?
same building.
Okay.
Same building was North End,
Yeah.
through the generator station that was on that end. And I was the guard assigned down there immediately after the incident, right after they started pulling people out of the explosion to maintain security of it, which was pretty much a farce, because you're not going to stop emergency people going in and out and check for a badge. You just need to let them do their work. But it was a necessary practice to follow at that time. Very needed.
And that was how long before the fire?
That was in '64.
Okay.
That was a long time before. That was June of '64. So that was many years before. And
Did you have the feeling that having knowledge of that experience was useful to you during the fire? Or?
I think it was more scary, knowing that unexplained, unexpected, impossible stuff could still happen. Because that was one of those things which was, they made up rules after the fact about you don't do certain things. Those rules did not exist before the fact. But you pretended like they did. And therefore somebody made a mistake to have this happen. And nobody knew. Nobody knew.
Yeah.
And we still don't know what a lot of those mixtures can do. And we never will. We never will. But I don't know where I was in the story.
Well, you'd sort of gotten past the fire. It sounds like you were in there a number of hours doing the firefighting.
I honestly don't remember. 3.5, 4 hours. It was a long time. Then we came out. Oh, go ahead.
And I presume you were pretty hot, contaminated.
Oh, yeah. Came out of the fire, went in. I have no clue where the shower room that we ended up in came from. I mean, I worked there for years afterwards. I know it was an adjacent building. But in my memories of that night, I don't remember walking more than maybe 50 yards. And yet, it's unreal in terms of wherever it was. It's another place. But we ended up in the shower room, and it was sort of a group shower, and you're in there scrubbing, and you had brushes, and you had bleach, and you had soap, and you scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed and dried off, and you went out, and they would measure to see where contamination was. You can go back and you'd scrub that area, and you got to a point where the bleach had taken off all the dead surface skin that normally protects you. You're getting pretty raw, and you just couldn't go anymore without creating bleeding, which then introduces the. So at any rate, we scrubbed down, and I actually ended up getting pretty clean. I had almost no chest hair left from the bleach. That had just gotten it off, and most of my body hair was gone. But this, I believe it was my left leg, was still hot. It was still, I forget, 5,000, something like that. At any rate, They taped me up in plastic. They just taped off the area in a large plastic bag and closed that. And I think I was on site that day for about 16 hours before I could go home. And I went home wearing that plastic bag with caution not to take it off, not to do anything. And I needed to go home. I needed just to get away from there. And I went home, slept, came back in following day. We went in, did some rewashing, and we got it clean. So that was the end of it.
I need to stop this tape
Sure.
and change it, so let's just...
While you're doing
stop
that, I
here.
will go get some coffee.